expecting will happen here?
I'll probably vote for Trump again.
Are you going to vote in 2020?
Well, it depends if Trump's running, and we'll see who's the other party is going to have. It's really how I feel. If I can't back them, I mean, everything is so negative.
The president should be respected. It doesn't matter who it is, whether you like him or not. However, the issues and the way that those people in higher offices hold themselves, they should be held to a higher standard. And they also need to be respectful of the people they work with.
Ariana, can you stir this? I gotta go over here.
Are you actually going to taste this?
Yeah, I'm going to try it. So what's your most important issue now that matters to you?
I would say taking care of the veterans. I think that's the one thing
You're a
that
veteran.
Trump did well.
If there's one unifying factor in this family, it would be the support of the veterans.
Does anybody really think the wall should be? It's a joke. We don't.
I'll put a wall with concertina wire on it so they can't get over it.
Actually, the bad guys can go around and vote. I mean, wall's not going to stop.
So how does the country find consensus? And families like your family?
Has the country ever found consensus?
The way we reach our consensus or compromise is by A, talking, and here's an idea, A, listening. We used to do that all the time, and we've stopped doing it.
Is Thanksgiving an opportunity for many families across America like yours to do that, to talk and listen?
Well, there's families out there that don't talk because of the politics right now.
Right.
We're family, and we've been family a whole lot longer than Trump's been in office and that we've been in this divisive political climate. But we love each other, we're family, bottom line, and pretty much that trumps everything else.
Trump, you said it!
Happy Thanksgiving, guys. Thanks for having me over.
That was interesting. Mariana Tencio there. With me now, Brett Stevens, New York Times op-ed columnist, and John Meacham, Rogers Distinguished Professor at Vanderbilt University. Both gentlemen are also MSNBC contributors. We've convened quite the panel on this Thanksgiving Eve. Usually we get like our D-listers in here, but wow. No, I'm joking. That's a joke for people who come on tomorrow, perhaps. John, let me start. Let me start with you. After President Trump was elected, these are just some of the headlines that we saw. You see them here on the screen for our viewers on Sirius Satellite Radio. I'll read a few of them. The Trump presidency destroying marriages across the country. PBS post-election stress disorder sweeps the nation. America's therapists are worried about Trump's effect on your mental health. Is this unique to this time in history, John Meacham, or has there always been so much strife around politics around our president?
Well, we had a civil war where we killed each other over existential questions of liberty and freedom. Families divided, Patriot versus Tory during the Revolution. Arthur Schlesinger used to say that the battles over intervention and isolationism in the late 1930s into 40 and 41 were more ferocious in intimate settings than even the battles over Vietnam. But just because something's happened before doesn't mean it's not happening now. And I have a theory about this. There's been a little bit of scholarship on it, that to some extent what's happening is, as particularly mainline Protestantism begins to fade from the center of the country, to some extent political strife and political loyalties have replaced religious belief and religious practice. And when you think about it, you have your own denomination, you nominally assent to the fact that you're part of a larger community, but by and large, you worship in your pew, you read your texts, you listen to your preachers. And I think that because we have a social cohesion now built on our social contract that is much more about conflict than cohesion, it's going to be a tough holiday for a lot of folks.
Are you saying that our politics has replaced our faith?
I think there's an interesting argument to be explored that there is a natural human impulse to seek meaning and order and community, and that more often than not at the moment, people are seeking meaning, order, and community in political tribalism as opposed to traditional religious communities and affiliations.
You buy that?
It's such a smart thesis, and I think it's a very intriguing one. I think there's an added dimension with Trump, which is that what divides us about Trump isn't simply a question of policy, although there is obviously that. it's also a perception of values and the place that values ought to play in our lives. I mean, it's very difficult for someone like me who has young children, a couple of teenagers, someone younger, to explain that a man whose behavior is like that of the president should occupy that kind of position. I mean, I used to have problems with some of Obama's policies. I disagreed with the Iran deal, one thing or another. But I never had trouble respecting Obama as a man or thinking of him as a really fitting symbol for the country, in the idea of the president occupying not just the position of head of government, but head of state, almost analogous to Queen Elizabeth in England. So my differences with whether it was President Obama or President Clinton were always essentially policy differences. Right. Actually, President Clinton was a little different because there it became a question of moral values. With President Trump, the real issue, and I think why it's so divisive, is a lot of people are saying, how can you support a guy with these views about minorities, these views about women, these views about his position in society, these views about the truth? These go to the sort of questions that religious institutions used to address, and perhaps John is right, no longer do. Of course, the great surprise is that so many people who identify as being religious conservative Christians find themselves supporting a president whose behavior is so at variance with what they espouse.
One of the things that I can...
A radical is what that he just said. The president's practices are radical. But I want to put my 2 cents in. What's happened here is that all of a sudden we live in a world to where everything now is micromanaged through a data diagnostic process. And if you're like me, which a lot of people are, they don't mind putting their opinion out there for other people to examine. Back in the 30s, back in the 40s, and throughout other eras, throughout other generations of cultures, there was more of a curtain of uncertainty. And in this curtain of uncertainty left the voter or the viewer of assuming that our president was going to be this way, or that certain things was going to be this way. And if the truth be known, I have noticed for probably the past, I'm going to say the past 30 years or more, possibly even 40, going back into the 70s, whenever the church community changed its dialogue to where the church community was no longer, "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." The church community was the political community. In other words, all the politicians moved into the church community, kind of like all the hippies back in the 60s that had the long hair and the beads and the bell bottoms and all the above. They all cleaned their acts up. They put on a nice shirt and a tie and a jacket or a whatever, and a beautiful dress, and they went from being in the fields of Woodstock to the halls of our laws. To the halls of our laws is where these same people that was beating their hair, that was doing acid, that was experimenting with microdot and window pane and quaaludes and preludes and acid, black beauties and yellow beauties towards staying up for days and days and days and nights and nights and days. The drug culture has been here, friends, since the Vietnam War. And it was the Vietnam War that brought a lot of this over here pertaining to porn. We didn't have porn. Nothing like it is today before the Vietnam War. Those guys that went over there that experienced a lot of that stuff gained an appetite for it and brought it back over here across the seas. In other words, they become contaminated over there. They brought their illnesses and Playboy books and Hustler books and all the above, Debbie Does Dallas, etc., etc. And that's whenever we started seeing our culture change. Not only did we start seeing our culture change, but we started seeing our religious institutions change. Because now, instead of the preacher preaching a hellfire and brimstone message that you're going to go to hell over, now they preach a Joe Osteen ear-tickling message that God is merciful and Jesus is an instrument of love. And in other words, they're only preaching certain parts of the Bible and not all the Bible. Because there is so much of this hypocrisy that has moved into the church communities. Not just one church, all of them. It just shows up more so in one church than it does another, like the Catholics. You know, we all want to say ooh and ah about child molestation pertaining to people being pedophiles. Well, guess what? Guess what? There's pedophiles in some of your religious institutions, such as your Pentecostal religion, your Assembly of God, your Church of God, your Church of God of Prophecy. These are all religious institutions in the Bible Belt area that was always considered towards being more holier than thou than, let's say, the Baptist. Even my grandmother, God bless her soul, Miss Vera Audell Jackson. I don't know if the statement that she made was correct or true. I can only tell you what she said. That the people down here in the Primitive Baptist Church in Obion County that we know of today as being a church society that is basically diminishing. But she used to tell me that those people back in the early 1900s was doing things illegitimate after church services was over with. The Hardshell Baptist is how that they was labeled back years ago. You'll still find a few Hardshell Baptist churches and a few free will Baptist churches, but there's very far and few between. They're mostly all either Baptist or Southern Baptist or Independent Baptist. But the bottom line is this: since the Vietnam War, we have been flooded with so much indifferences over here, with sin entwangling with the church community, to the point that now it's hard to detect the church community from the out and out raw sinner that lives out here in the street somewhere that don't even go to church because of their immoral practices. And if you'll add that with society towards the digital age that we live in, along with people such as myself here at the Windmill Ministries Missions that wants to view and document and put its opinion out there to various people to look at and to be a part of, this has created a climate or a toxic environment for more bickering, for more arguing, and for more people of basically not getting along. Our intent isn't to divide here at the Windmill Ministries Missions. Our intent is not to demoralize or to harm and to hurt the churches, but to bring the churches together as the churches was brought together during and after the Civil War. And we all know that there was illegitimacy practices that was going on after the Civil War pertaining to the Ku Klux Klan and how that they was using black people for a whipping post pertaining to the Civil War. But the reason why that it has been brought up a notch, the tone has gotten louder, is simply because of social media. Simply because of social media. We have so much social media now. It hadn't been too long that whenever they said, well, she's on the phone or he's on the phone, you was literally on the phone. You had a cord that come out of the wall that was only 3 or 4 feet, and whenever you was talking to somebody, you stayed within that confine of talking on the phone. And then, of course, they come out later with the, the teal green phone with the long cord to where you could walk anywhere you wanted to in the house towards tearing up stuff on the table and tangling the dog in it, to the point that whenever you did hang the phone up, it turned into a big ball of nothing but wires. But we have gone from that period of communications to where now we can literally talk, walk, chew bubble gum, play music, and do crossword puzzles all at the same time. We can literally drive down our automobiles and communicate with other people, just like if we was tied to that phone whenever they said back years ago, he's on the phone. Well, you was literally on the phone because you couldn't go nowhere else other than that confined little area that you was at. And of course, before that, we know the history pertaining to the old crank phones back years ago, and of course whenever they was listening to each other. So it's so much more plentiful of communications that has taken the microphone and basically turned it up a notch. Now let's listen to these analysts and what they have to say pertaining to their ideology, because that's the reason why that I wanted to record this a day before Thanksgiving on the Golden Jubilee in 2018, because some of the things that they're talking about, we feel like are credible, educational, and other people need to examine what that they're saying too as well. So let's please listen.
Continue to find fascinating in this current age in which we find ourselves, politically especially. There was a time where you could have a conversation around a table with people who came from various political leanings, but the conversation themselves were rooted in some semblance of fact. I find now that you can be talking to people who, again, conservative, liberal, whatever have you, they don't even care about the facts. Yeah. There's no concern about facts. This fact checker, Brett, your paper today published this handy guide. It's very fascinating. I saw it and I thought this actually may be useful. Not to say that other things in the New York Times aren't especially useful. You get my point. But this is the hot button issues to avoid list according to the New York Times. The midterm election results, the migrant caravan, healthcare, the Kavanaugh fight, the economy. Pretty much anything that's happened in this country over the past 6 months, you should avoid talking about at your Thanksgiving table. By the way, I would encourage all of you watching, listening to print that out. Brett, the conversation around your table during the holidays Do you talk politics? Is this something that comes up at all?
Yeah,
Or do you
sure,
stay away
but
from
we all agree, so it's a lot easier. We're all on the same side of these questions, so I think it's a matter of your emphasis on disgust until finally one of the kids says, "Okay, we're bored with politics. Let's talk about something else." And I find it's one of the things that I've been trying to do, just on a personal level, is separate my disgust with the president, his policies, and his behavior with my view about his supporters, because I have too many friends who pull the lever for President Trump. I know that they are good and decent and moral people, and I don't want to judge them morally simply on account of their political preferences. But that takes an effort on my part, and I'm trying to be more conscious about it.
John Meacham, Thanksgiving table there. Do you guys talk politics, or do you just talk sports?
Well, we talk about John Tyler, so we try to do as many 19th century presidents as possible. I hope they're not watching. Well, it's MSNBC, so they're not. My in-laws in Mississippi actually have only been impressed with me when occasionally I'm attacked on Fox, because that's the only time I cross their radar screen. So no, honestly. Although I had since this seems to be a support group about our families. I had a lunch yesterday with an in-law where 20 of the 25 minutes or so was about politics, and it goes exactly, Craig, to what you just said. We just didn't begin with the same assumptions. And so I would play in 1890 it was XYZ, and it's a useful diversion because then they wander off. But I think it's particularly it's an interesting microcosm, right? Because, and Brett writes about this a lot. My sense is if we don't find a way to reinstate and honor the role of reason and of being able to take account of changing circumstances and shifting data to change our views on things of public value, then we're not being true to what I think of as the true original intent of the revolution, which is very grand to say, but it has the virtue of being true. When Jefferson wrote that all men were created equal, he did it not because he was just a rising young politician of Virginia, but because he had been in this transatlantic conversation, including the scientific revolution and the European Enlightenment and the Reformations and the translation of sacred scripture into the vernacular, Gutenberg, rise of the bourgeoisie, this entire shift of the world to being one in which reason could lead us past just reflexive obedience to authority, whether it was a pope or a king. And that's the insight on which the Republic was founded. And if we don't think when people say something, and we don't think that maybe they're right. Now, 99 times out of 100, they're probably, you're going to disagree. But I've been thinking a lot about this. I think we need to find a way to get to a kind of patriotic partisanship, because partisanship is fine. That's the oxygen of government, but it's of a free society. But it is this reflexive partisanship. And what Brett just said, I think, is so important, is you can't paint with a brush. You can't take the president's behavior and attribute it to all of his supporters. At the same time, his supporters have to have an honest accounting of what they're supporting. And is it worth the candle?
John Meacham, happy Thanksgiving. Brett Stevens, happy Thanksgiving. Patriotic partisanship. You take that away. Fascinating conversation. I so enjoyed this. We should do this again. You guys we should start making this a regular thing. And now they're
as long as the in-laws aren't watching, we're safe.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. The Northeast, by the way, bracing for record cold temperatures on Thanksgiving Day. New York City could feel the coldest temperatures for the holiday in 117 years. And that could actually impact the balloons for the world-famous Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. This is a big deal for millions of people. NBC's Kristen Dahlgren live at New York's Herald Square. What's the word, Kristen? Are the balloons going to be okay?
That is a good question, and one I don't have an answer to, because they're actually going to make that a game time decision, Craig. What they're worried about is the wind. We know that it's going to be cold. We know it's going to be the coldest Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade in history since they started doing this in 1924. But the big question is, are the winds going to be too high for those 26 giant balloons that everybody loves to fly. In 1997, there was an accident. A woman was severely injured. And so they made a rule that those balloons can't fly if the winds are gusting upwards of 34 miles an hour. We are right on the cusp of that tomorrow. So they're looking at the forecast, but what they're really going to do is lay out anemometers, so wind detecting devices along the parade route. And tomorrow morning, they will see just how high those winds are. They have the option of either lowering the balloons, or if the winds are too high, they may have to ground them altogether. They haven't grounded those balloons since 1971, so the 3 million people that come out are going to be very disappointed if that happens, but they'll just have to keep an eye on things tomorrow morning. For those 3 million people coming out, though, it is no doubt that it is going to be very cold, so a lot of layers tomorrow, or you may want to stay inside and watch it on NBC.
We like the plug. Kristen Dahlgren there at Macy's, just a few blocks from here. Thanks, Kristen. Just 6 days from now, voters in Mississippi.
All right, I want to weigh in again on what you just heard. You just heard that the famous parade that has been going now since 1924, that this is probably going to be one of the most coldest Macy's parades that they have ever had to experience. Now, your liberals, your narrow-minded people out there, will immediately, whenever they hear that, they'll reflect and say, oh, I thought we had global warming, pertaining to the environmentalist. What they don't understand is that come Christmas time, or around Christmas time, it hasn't been too many years ago, I think about maybe 15, 17 years ago, 18 years ago, right here in Northwest Tennessee, registered about 85 or 86 degrees. It was like a week or 2 weeks after Christmas, whenever all the tornadoes hit down in Jackson, Tennessee, that stayed on the ground. One stayed on the ground for like 67 miles. Our narrow-minded, weak, negative people are the people that has helped to engineer all this doubt pertaining to environmental changes. That's the point that I want to make. And also another point that I want to make, if you'll take notice in a lot of the material that we put out to the general public, sometimes we want to soften it up a little bit. And the way that we soften it up a little bit is sometimes we bring in superhero figures, regardless whether it's Spider-Man or the Minions or using other type of tactics as far as bears, stuffed animals. We want to mix it up a little bit to soften the message up a little bit. That way it don't sound so detrimental all the time pertaining to God, 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 the devil, the devil, the devil, God versus the devil versus God. We want to mix it up a little bit for our viewers. That way maybe they won't be overwhelmed to the point that they do actually think that the individual that's speaking right now is some sort of a religious nut, a Bible thumper, in which I don't mind being categorized as a Bible thumper or a religious nut. If I'm going to be a nut, I'd rather be a religious nut than I would be some of these other nuts out here running around that basically are wolves in sheep's clothing. But there's a purpose for not wanting to overload people's minds and people's hearts. This is the point that I'm trying to make. Please bear with us. The internet, social media, and it doesn't matter if it's Twitter, Angie's List, Facebook, YouTube, whatever. It has overloaded a lot of people. And because they are overloaded, it's a form or a type of culture shock. Because we're seeing this culture shock over here in America that all of a sudden, like 270 million people stepped out into the playing field towards wanting to be a part of, it has caused chaos. It has caused anarchy. It has caused, in some effects, a negative atmosphere versus a positive atmosphere. This is the very thing that I was talking to my niece about, as well as my son, that every item in the world, first of all, has to have some sort of a balance to it. Because one can become so heavenly minded that they are no earthly good. But every item and the devices that we hold in our hands now, that we can gain so much information off of, that's basically an encyclopedia and a dictionary and all the above, library and dictionary and everything else in there, are an instrument the same way as a rifle or a gun. And you can take that instrument and use it for good purposes, or you can take that instrument and use it for bad purposes. That's one of the reasons why that I don't think the answer of going around dismantling everybody's gun unwillfully would be the right and fair answer. It's the state of mind that people are in that has gotten off the rule of law. The rule of law has always been to society, ever since I can remember, since Jesus come into the world, is to do unto others as you would have them to do unto you. We are somehow or another sliding back off into the rule of law like it was back during the old Mosaic law. And that law was an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Because so many ministers, preachers, evangelists, so many spiritual counselors have not been preaching the true definition of the Bible towards turning thy cheek and offering thy other, towards love thy enemies and do good to those who despitefully use you and abuse you. Because so many have compromised in the Word of God, it has created this atmosphere that is an atmosphere of toxicity right here in the USA. And if you'll combine that with the tools that now everybody and their brother has, and if you combine that with the morals that has been shattered here in America pertaining to all the ungodliness that we have become adapted to pertaining to porn and being calloused of these ongoing events that happen almost on an ongoing everyday to-day level. And if you'll, yes, combine that with an unexperienced president that sometimes addresses the people in a bashful or a sub-critical way, that it's almost in and of itself an atmosphere of violence. If you'll combine all the above together, what you have is an atmosphere of a perfect storm. A perfect storm. That's what's going on here. We must go back to our original roots of the Word of God. We must start teaching the true fundamentals of the teachings of Christ if we plan on turning this ship around and heading in a different direction than what we're going in now. I can understand the reason why the French president is actually contemplating creating his own alliance because he's scared of Donald Trump. It's not just that he's scared of Donald Trump. He's scared of the atmosphere that's coming from the American land across the pond. And there's other people that look at this atmosphere that's been created in the past 2 years since Donald Trump has stepped off into the arena towards being so verbal and so open with his expressions towards, well, let's knock them out, or I could kill somebody and I would still be everybody's friend, and let's put this one in jail and that one in jail. It's just some of the stuff that Donald Trump is creating. It's creating an atmosphere that is not the true American traditional heritage. They do not see or understand us towards us being this way. And the reason why that we're being this way is some of the things that I just got to explaining to you about. And if you'll compile that with us being $21+ trillion in debt, all our jails being full, and our politics being nothing but corrupt and rotten, and our churches being full of corruption and wickedness, it would make one scratch their heads and begin to say, what is really going on over across the pond in the USA? And that's the reason why the Windmill Ministries missions has been so verbal, has been so audible in bringing these various messages to various people. Not only in the year of the Golden Jubilee in 2018, but also in discharging all its other information, regardless of what form, for the past 30 years. This is the very thing that our founders, going back to our forefathers, was concerned and worried about as far as the Constitution towards people expanding and going too far with freedom of speech, with freedom of religion, and freedom of this and that. And whenever this occurs, when this occurs, and you start seeing such outlandish behavior in a society, in a culture, that is the very thing that terrifies us, in knowing that whenever Big Brother, known as the government, can no longer control and conduct its affairs pertaining to the rule of law, not the old law pertaining to an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but the original law of the law of grace. That's whenever we have to worry about condemnation falling up onto a society in the way that it is falling, in the form of too much rain, not enough rain, humongous hurricanes, outlandish outbreaks of tornadoes, 700-800 tornadoes in one day, extreme drought conditions, creating atmosphere of in-depth fires that has now recently just devastated the people out west. We're seeing Mother Nature lash out in an unstable environment, and it's the very environment that the people have created for themselves. I myself have spoken up and said, I think that the weather has turned out to have been just as unstable as the people. And in ways it actually has. Well, why is this happening? One must scratch their head and start deciphering, translating, why is this happening? Well, if you go back to the Bible, it'll tell you, because these are the great sorrows that the Bible talks about because of the sin of man. These are signs that obviously humanity is not picking up on, other than a few. There are a few out there that has picked it up pertaining to the signs coming out of the Bible. But these are signs that we are supposed to be very, very aware of, and these are also characteristics of the very same people before us that was having this type of behavior, that God eventually, once he identified that he was dealing with a hopeless society, he basically took out the whole society. And he took them out in the form of either an ice age, or a meteor falling out of the sky, or a major disease, or a war, or famine. There's all kinds of ways that God can allow for these sudden occurrences to happen to society, because he's trying to steer us back over where we're supposed to be, and we're not paying attention to what God is trying to get his message across to. If you're thinking that God is going to miraculously speak to you audibly out of the blue, and I'm not saying that hasn't happened and won't happen or cannot happen, because God actually spoke through an ass one time whenever Paul was beating the critter almost to death, and said to Paul, why dost thou persecute the Christians and kick against the pricks? So God can cause the ravens to come down and to bring manna from heaven if that's what he desires. But he'd rather not use such drastic means, because whenever he does things like that, the human mind ordinarily rejects it. The human mind ordinarily is overwhelmed. And because it's strange or unusual or odd, the human mind will kick it out and say, oh, I was having a delusion, or I was imagining something, or my imagination was running wild. God is real. We serve a God of the living and not a God of the dead. And I felt like that this conversation today needed to be documented in the form that it's being documented. And I felt like that it would be wise if I put my 2 cents in. They call it weighing in to your opinion, because I personally feel like that my opinion should be just as valuable as anybody else's out there. And of course, once more, it's up to the preceptor, it's up to the viewer, it's up to whoever gets a hold of this message to make their own evaluation of whether or not they agree or whether or not they disagree, whether or not they go along or whether or not they don't go along. Once more, we are supposed to be a highly intelligent form of human beings that are part of the Homo sapien race down here. And we must listen and debate, contemplate, dissect, translate, look at all points of views for our own existence. Thanks again for listening. Good luck to each and every one of us in the year of the Jubilee.
The president previewed during his campaign.
It's just awfully good that someone with the temperament of Donald Trump is not in charge of the law in our country.
Because you'd be in jail.
Siding with the Saudis, President Trump backing the Saudi crown prince, ignoring the CIA's conclusion that Mohammed bin Salman ordered the killing of American journalist Jamal Khashoggi.
The CIA has looked at it, they've studied it a lot, they have nothing definitive. And the fact is, maybe he did, maybe he didn't.
But we have a crown prince that I believe directed the killing of a journalist. And the language that was used, it was as if they were writing a press release for Saudi Arabia, not for the United States.
And movable feast, an entire California town putting aside their own Thanksgiving plans to help their neighbors in Paradise, who of course lost everything to the wildfires. Even the local firefighters still battling the flames, joining the effort.
Turkey Drive 2018. We really need your help. This year I won't be able to be there.
And happy day before Thanksgiving. I'm Andrea Mitchell in Washington. President Trump is at Mar-a-Lago at his resort for Thanksgiving as an explosive New York Times report reveals the White House counsel had to stop the president from ordering the Justice Department to prosecute Hillary Clinton and James Comey. Former counsel Don McGahn even ordering a memo to warn the president that such a step could be an impeachable offense. Joining me now, NBC White House correspondent Kristen Welker.
You see what I'm saying? That's insanity. Insanity.
In Florida with the president, Harry Littman, former U.S. Attorney and Deputy Assistant Attorney General, MSNBC Justice and Security Analyst Matt Miller, the former Chief Spokesman for Attorney General Eric Holder, and MSNBC contributor Ruth Marcus, Deputy Editorial Page Editor at The Washington Post, and an attorney herself. This breaks all norms. Kristen Welker, the president seemingly unaware or not concerned or determined to go after his rivals, even though there is a firewall that is supposed to exist between presidents of the United States and the Justice Department and prosecutions.
That's right, Andrea, and it raises real questions about how he sees his powers and his relationship with his own Justice Department. I spoke with a former administration official who said, look, this shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone because this is something that President Trump has signaled since he was a candidate. As you just pointed out, this is something that he's effectively signaled after he took office. Still, the fact that he had these conversations is striking. Now, based on that New York Times report, we know that McGahn's response to him is, look, you could make yourself vulnerable to potential impeachment if you tried to move forward with this. But again, it sort of underscores how the president views his powers. He has gotten criticized from Democrats and Republicans alike.
This is stuff like you would hear a thug boss, somebody in charge of a gang or a mob, a mobster. This is the type of lingo that you would hear coming from a mobster leader. And